Well, hello and welcome to another webinar by XTM International. Today we're going to talk about TM management and file alignment. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Iñaki Hernandez Laza, and I'm a member of the experts team at XTM. Before we start though, I would like to mention a few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive the recording afterwards. You will also be able to access it in the future through XTM On Demand. If you haven't done so yet, please visit our website and register to access all of XTM's webinars. This will give you free access to past webinars on many different subject matters. All participants are muted by default, and if you wish to ask a question, please do so via the chat panel, and I will try and answer questions at the end of the session if time allows to do that. So let's start today with the topic of TM management and file alignment. Many times we have a lot of customers, and you probably, if you are an enterprise, you have a number of issues. You may have no translation memories available to you, but on the other hand, you may have a set of files in a source and a target language that you have from legacy materials, and we can use that linguistic corpus to be aligned in XTM. Now, by doing so, we have immediate benefits. First of all, we can create a translation memory from those set of files, let's say English, US, and Spanish. We can create a translation memory, we can align the files, create a translation memory, and of course, you can start using that translation memory for instant leveraging in your project. So that is a very, very huge advantage that otherwise you cannot maximize if you don't have a TM. On the other hand, if we have an alignment performed by XTM Cloud, we can also carry out a bilingual term extraction. And that obviously is very, very significant in terms of benefits, because you can validate the output given to you by XTM Cloud, create a term base, import it into the system, and start using terminology in a consistent and efficient way in your projects. So today what we're going to do is to show you how to get a set of files, align them in XTM, create the alignment. We're going to look at the alignment output. We're also going to look at the terminology extraction at bilingual level. And then we're going to import that into the system and see how that executes in the system in XTM Cloud. Okay, so without further ado, let me go into my platform. Let me go into my actual instance of XTM, and I have prepared something for you in order to maximize the time that we have today. Now, before we start, it's important to mention who can do alignments in the system. As you can see, and if you are familiar with XTM, we have a huge number of modules here, and these modules are roles and access rights driven. In other words, you determine as an enterprise administrator to whom you want to give access to the TM module. Okay, the TM module is where you perform the alignment. Obviously, you can manage your TMs, you can import your TMs in here, as we will see, you can export them, and you can align them. But first of all, it's important that you determine from the customer point of view, who are you giving access to this, okay? Now, let's go to the users, and this is very, very important. At the moment, as a user, I'm logging as Iñaki Administrator. So as Iñaki Administrator in here, I have all these roles: Administrator, Linguist, Project Manager, TM Expert. This is the important one for today's webinar, and Terminologies. This is also important for today's webinar. And as part of these roles, I can execute the following workflow steps. I can translate, I can transcreate, I can correct, I can review, etc. But more importantly, on the access rights here on the left-hand side frame, we need to determine if you want that user to align or not. Okay, let's go to another user. So you can see I have a user here, I believe is called TM Expert. And this TM Expert has the role of TM Expert, but basically under the access right, this person can align TMs as well. So remember, role-based access to different modules authentications, and access rights. And it's very important that you define to whom you want to give this specification. You may not want to give this access to a linguist. You may not want to give this to a PM. PMs will not have this role typically, but obviously you will have something within you or somebody within your organization who is a TM expert or a terminology expert, and that person can exercise these rights. Okay. So the first thing I want to show you before we go into more detail, first thing I want to show you is, imagine I have, like we said in the slide deck, we have no translation memory, but I have a set of files in English and in Spanish. Again, could be Japanese, could be Korean, any language really, right? And it could be any file format as well. Just for the sake of the exercise for today's demo, I have prepared 4 little files to show you a file in MS Word, a PDF, a text file, and a PowerPoint. But again, you can have resource files, PO files, HTMLs, XMLs, whatever the case might be. But very, very simply, I open a file in MS Word, and it talks about XTM features and functionalities, okay? It is very important that when I open the Spanish file, if I go to my, excuse me, let me go to my Spanish file here, it has the same nomenclature in the file name, okay? Because otherwise XTM cannot map those files together. So if you have file 1 in English, we recommend highly that the Spanish file is called file 1 as well. So we have the equivalent file in Spanish, translating to Spanish. I am a Spanish native speaker, but I put this through Google Translate to do something very, very quick. So I didn't have to translate it myself. Now, accordingly, we have in English, we have a file to PDF, and we have in Spanish the equivalent file to, etc., etc., etc. So very important, we have set of files in English, set of files in Spanish, source and target language. It could be any language combination, really. Okay. Now, an important thing as well is to, rather than uploading file by file, you create a zip file. Once you have all these files created, obviously you create it as English.zip, let's call it, and for Spanish, Spanish.zip. Okay. So the first thing to go into the system would be to do the alignment. And the alignment is confronted, is within the TM module, and within the TM module is under the Align feature. So let's create a reference name for the alignment, and I'm going to call it TM Management Alignment. I have already created for you to maximize the time today. The source language is English, English US, and my target language is Spanish, Spanish Spain, which is here. Now, I choose the files, and remember how we said it's in the desktop. I have my English file here as a zip, and my Spanish files are again here in my desktop under Spanish directory, Spanish.zip. Okay, I select the customer to which I want to basically relate this alignment, and it's a customer called TM Alignment Webinar. I can also include inline elements if I have inline elements in my files, but remember that the inline elements must correspond as well in file, source, and target, okay? And this is an important thing as well. This is where we perform a bilingual term extraction. So once we click on the button Align, the system will start mapping segments in the source files against segments in the target files. And I have done this already prior to this call, so we can have the output here. You click on download, and that will make sure that they are downloaded into your downloads directory in your system. Once you have the zip file, you unzip that file, and you have 3 files. You have a file that is called aligned 90 plus, one file that is called aligned, and one called aligned terms, which is the bilingual term extraction. Align 90 is where the system believes that there's a 90+% probability of having the alignment done correctly. Now, given that it's only a few files, I'm going to open the Align file, which will contain all the segments in source and target. You have a probability case here what the system determines the certainty or the probability of that alignment being correct. And it tells you in color coding as well that it's the same. So pretty much if you start looking at this alignment, XTM workflow in Spanish, flujo de trabajo XTM, you can load the source documents and apply, puede cargar los documentos, etc., etc. Now, what is very important is that this file is validated by a native speaker of that language. So basically, the work will consist on going to this file and making sure that, yes, the alignment is done correctly and that the source and the target correspond. Now, you can pretty see how you have one in yellow here. Yellow means that not sure. And the reason it's not sure is because look at the difference between XTM QA Manager, where in Spanish, QA Manager has been translated as Gerente de Control de Calidad. So QA is Control de Calidad. And based on the length of the segment in source and target, the system is alerting me and saying, I'm not 100% sure about this, but check it out. So obviously we check this out, that is correct. Now you will see the same here, PO settings, PO is orden de compra, again, different length. So the system is telling me to double check that. Now you will see how there's a couple of things that I want to highlight here in blue in the source. And the blue in the source means that if we go up to the top to the color legends that have been merged. And I'll show you why that has happened. The reason why that has happened is because if you look at this, override assignments specifies whether to use DOMI assignee settings for the entire workflow or only where no linguist has been assigned. Then the following segment says, force manual tracking before start of the project. If you look at the Spanish segment, you can see how here there is no space there. So what happened is that because the target segments did not have a space, they have been merged. But this is a case of getting this, cutting this here, and making sure this corresponds to that one, okay? And similarly, in this example, we have two merged because in here, again, there's no space in here. In primero, in there should be a space. So obviously it's a case of getting this segment in Spanish and putting it in there, okay? But the system is alerting me through color coding to verify certain things. Okay, let's assume we go through this exercise. And then what we're going to do is this constitutes now the source to create a translation memory, okay? So let's do that. Let's finish this file. That's fine. I don't want to go into this file again. We assume it's completed, it has been validated, etc. We go back into our system. And again, having the rights necessary to allow or to perform this task, I go to my TM module, to my TM import, and then I select the customer. The customer is TM Alignment Webinar. My import project name, I can call it again TM Alignment Webinar. My source language is English, English US. My target language is Spanish, Spain. I want to import this as approved because I have gone through the process of doing the alignment and validating everything. So these are approved already. Again, you can remove leading and trailing spaces. You can import alt trans elements from XT files, which is not the case for this exercise of this webinar today. You can also import segments that have the same source and target. And that could well happen where you have a source and a target that are identical because maybe the segment is a do not translatable, maybe it's a DNT as we call it. So you still want to import those to make sure that the linguists know that the target is the same as the source for a reason, because it's not translatable. Now you can also set tags for imported TMs, and the tags are things that you can categorize your segments with. You can create set of tags in the system. In this particular case, I'm not going to do it, but again, you can go and select your tags and imagine these TMs pertain to marketing collateral. And within marketing collateral, I want to apply the tag of Europe. So I can say, yes, this is going to go for marketing Europe. Okay, in this particular case, I'm not going to apply it, but there is a possibility of applying tags to translation memory segments. And again, you also have the possibility of extracting the bilingual terminology, but I have already done so as part of the alignment, okay? So all we would have to do is choose the file, and my file is here on my desktop. And again, sorry, it's in my downloads. It will be this Align file that we have done, and I will click on import. Now, I have already done it. As you can imagine, you can see here, Align Excel, TM Alignment webinar. I did it before in order to maximize the time of this webinar. So what will happen once you import that? It tells me it's done, status is done. I can go to manage, and I can go into customer, again, TM Alignment webinar, my source is US English, my target is Spanish, and I can search on that. And I can see how I have 87 segments. So remember, these are segments whereby I had my source and my targets, but I didn't have a translation memory. So now I have created a translation memory very, very simply by aligning, validating the output in Excel, and importing the file. And now I have a translation memory. Source corresponds to the target, source corresponds to the target, and I have inserted the status of approved. Remember that when we imported this, we selected here the status of approved. Yeah, okay. So that's the first step in the process. Now let's look at the other output which is generated, which is the bilingual term extraction. And this is very, very interesting. And I can say quite confidently that we have very, very strong, if not the strongest technology for alignment and for this kind of exercise, having worked with many, many tools in the industry in this area. So first of all, this is created based on algorithms and artificial intelligence and interlanguage vector sectors. So basically, this allows us to create a source, identify potential nouns, noun phrases, and verbs in the source, the corresponding in the target. But not only that, it's also giving us surface forms, frequency occurrence, and context information. And let me explain that. Now you can see how a statistic source appears 3 times, but also appears 2 times with a capital S. So these surface forms would be derivatives of the original that is put on column A, and these 3 and 2 equals frequency 5. So this term appears 5 times in different formats: lowercase, uppercase, singulars, plurals, etc. Okay. Now, it also tells me the context. In this particular case, it's giving me 3 contexts in which that term appears. Now, obviously, this output needs to be validated by a terminologist or by a linguist in order to making sure that you only import the terms that are relevant to your projects or to your enterprise. Remember that the identification of noun phrases and nouns can render something like XTM, can render something like linguist. Maybe you don't want to have that in your glossary, in your term base, obviously. So you can just delete it. That is no problem. You can delete that row, and that is no problem. You eliminate it from the output that you're going to import as a term base. Now, also what you want to do is select the most representative sentence in order to give further linguistic reference to the linguist. Look at this case, for instance, XTM Workbench. We have 3 sentences, and one of them is just XTM Workbench. That doesn't give me a lot of linguistic reference if I were a linguist, a translator. I would prefer to have something that gives me more linguistic reference, and perhaps I would select the top sentence as the most representative to have in my final term base. Okay, so you can do the exercise of cleaning the sources, identifying the ones you want to maintain, looking at the surface forms and the frequency occurrence, see which ones appear most times because you want to keep them, and also identifying the best context for that particular term. Then you go into your column H. In this particular case, statistics source in Spanish has been identified as fuente de estadísticas, which is correct. Statistics target, destino de estadísticas, which is correct, etc., etc., etc. Now, there might be cases where the identification of the target is not perfect. And obviously, you're depending on algorithms, you're depending on artificial intelligence, and sometimes those may fail, okay? But that is why it's important to have a human terminologist or linguist going through this output and verifying, yes, this is correct in English and Spanish. And again, you have your corresponding targets to the context that you have in English and in Spanish in this case. Now, typically, not always the case, but typically the context in the target is not always needed in the term base. The context in English, or in the source language, is most definitely needed in order to provide linguistic reference to a linguist. So once we do this exercise, and once we clean up this glossary, and once we make sure that we have the sources that we want, the targets are fine, the context that we want, what we want to do is obviously import this file into the system. Now, we go into the system again, making sure we have the necessary import rights for the terminology module. And let me open the terminology module here. And if you're not familiar with this, we can obviously support different standards like TBX, and obviously you can import and export into those formats. So in this particular case, I have done the import again to save on time today. But the mechanism would be very simple. Go into the import feature within the terminology module, select the customer, which is XTM Alignment Webinar. I'm going to choose my file. And remember that file is this, Align Terms. I am not going to click this option because that would be adding to existing concepts that already exist in the term base. I don't have anything imported, so I don't need to select that. I would select the status as valid. And again, I can set tags for the terminology. I can also set tags there. Imagine I can say, okay, this belongs to marketing in Europe, for instance, right? So I can apply those tags as well for the terms, but I'm not going to do that today. And again, once you click on import, that will be imported into the system. How do I know that? I go to the manage within the terminology module, and we have 56 terms imported here. If we validate that with my align terms, we have a total of 56 terms here in the count, which is exactly the terms that we have imported into the system. Now, remember that we have marked them as valid in the import. So we have the term, I don't know, let's say customer. The term customer in English is valid. I have a context reference here for linguistic reference, and I have cliente valid in Spanish. If I have something like memory, memory is valid. I have my sentence, memoria, valid. And again, I have my context in Spanish as well, because I decided to import it, although it's not always necessary. Okay, so how will this work in real time in a project? So this is very beneficial, like we said from the beginning, right? You have a set of files, you align them, you create the alignment, you analyze them, validate them, and then do the same with the terminology and import that. So obviously when we go to a project, I have created a little project here for you. And basically what we'll see is the following. By uploading files into the system, basically you can see how already these have become straight away ICE matches. ICE matches meaning in context exact matches, which means that not only the segment is the same, but the previous and the following segment are also the same. So you can take it pretty much that these are absolutely perfect in terms of recognition, in terms of matching, right? But also you can see how the terminology that has been imported into the system has been decorated or recognized. So that appears in blue. So if you look at the term terminology, for instance, I click in there, is terminología. But if I hover here, I have all my information. I have my translation, I have my contexts in Spanish and in English because I imported that. I have the status as valid, who has modified it, the status, the date of modification, and who has done it, okay? So all that information, obviously, when you have a segment here, you will see that segment 4, in terminology, there are 6 matches here. The term workflow, terminology, task, translator, language, and target, they are all in the terminology module, all those terms, which allows me very, very quickly to right-click and say, insert into the segment. I don't need to do so because it's already inserted. I can edit it, of course. I can open the terminology module from here. But again, I can obviously do something from here as well, right? I can change the term if I want. So pretty much the logic is that, and I hope this makes sense in terms of the workflow that we have seen. So just to recap, what we have covered today is basically how we don't have TMs, but we had a set of files that we can use in order to align that linguistic corpus, and we have benefits straight away. The first benefit is to create translation memory that we can start in the leveraging. Again, we can have a second massive benefit, which is to create a bilingual term extraction, a bilingual term base that we can validate and import it. And basically, straight away, you can see if we go to my project metrics here, let me do that. If I go to this project, my metrics are going to show me straight away. I have 89 segments, 1,433 words, but I have ice matches, leverage matches, fuzzy matches. Straight away, we've come from a situation whereby I just had a set of files and I had no TM to pretty much, we have massive leveraging here. And for instance, to do, I think we have very little to do, to be done, 200 words, I believe, as opposed to 1,157 that are already done through leveraging. So obviously that results in very significant savings and time to market advantage as well. Okay. Now, I don't know at this point in time if we have any questions or not. I don't see any questions. Okay, so if there are no more questions, this concludes today's webinar. I would like to sincerely thank you for attending today's session.